So every time at the moment that I pick up a heavy weight in the gym, I think to myself, what am I actually doing? Why am I picking up something really heavy just to put it down again? It feels a little bit like effort for effort's sake. But then I remind myself that for me personally, it's more about the way that it makes me feel, both physically and mentally, while I'm exercising and then after exercising. But I think for a lot of people, they exercise out of obligation. They exercise because it's something on their to-do list, or potentially as a compensatory method for not eating well or living a sedentary lifestyle. So in this episode, I want to dive into exercise a little bit more, why we exercise, and how I feel like modern fitness and the modern fitness industry may have moved itself away and detached from the function and the purpose of exercise in the first place. And then I also want to touch on the main benefits of movement and our need for variety within our routine in order to keep our bodies healthy and why we would want to do that. So let's get into it.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Thinking Differently, a podcast designed to take an idea, pull it apart, and challenge the way that we think about it. I'm your host, Andy Franklin, and I'll be your guide through this sometimes wandering journey of exploration, which will hopefully leave you with more questions than answers and a lot to think about.
Right, so first off, as I always say, the subjects that I'm talking about, I'm just trying to bring them into my awareness and everybody else's awareness to investigate how I feel about them and to see if there's any improvements that I can make to my mental model. All of the opinions are my own, and I am also hoping that they may change over time. I like to think of myself as having a growth mindset. So if I'm shown new evidence that changes my way of thinking, then my beliefs towards a certain subject will change with them. I'm also not here to give you your answers. I am intending to just ask some interesting questions, play with some ideas a little bit, and hopefully, if it does create a catalyst for you to investigate how you feel about something as well, then that's my job done. So let's get into the detail a little bit, and we'll start by talking about what I believe is kind of a broad overview of the history of exercise in our modern society. So I think if you look back to the ancient practices, so the yoga out of India, or even the ancient Greeks with their sports and Olympics and things like that, everything was based on functional fitness. It was you were doing a thing in order to do that thing better. And with yoga specifically, it was targeted on making sure that your body was strong and healthy and was able to do all of the things that you wanted it to do throughout your life without pain or discomfort or without a lack of strength or agility or ability. And then also before the Industrial Revolution, a lot of people's jobs were a lot more manual. There was a lot more physicality as part of their jobs. There was also a lot more physicality generally in terms of walking more, farming both your own land and also potentially as part of your job. And then there was things like horse riding and other kind of physical activities that you would just do as part of your general life. Then I think the Industrial Revolution came along and it changed the way that we used our bodies. Everybody became more sedentary, and there was a shift towards creating what we now call exercise. But the modern form of exercise is kind of a fix for the fact that we weren't moving as much with our day-to-day life. And then kind of fast forward through to the 20th century when the advent of bodybuilders came along, where it was all about aesthetics and not about what your body could actually do. And I think that kind of moves us to the place where we're at now, where I feel like there's probably a disconnect between our bodies and how our bodies feel and what we are shown as an ideal for what a body should look like. I think we've detached our functional fitness and our functional ability to move through space without injury. And instead, we're focused a lot more on aesthetics and what we look like to the outside world. And then I think the other modern trend, especially with the invention and wide scale adoption of gyms to go to, is that everything is based in a single plane, meaning everything is kind of up and down or side to side, and there isn't a lot of functional movement involved in that. And I think that leads to other kind of health implications for a lot of people. So being able to do a really solid back squat, which is up and down, doesn't then mean that you have the stability and support within your core and your spine, not to put your back out when you're twisting to get your kid out of your car. I also think that aesthetics does play a big part in all of this. So I found a really interesting video created by Pure Gyms, in fact, that I will link in the show notes, just showing the changes to what was considered the ideal body shape over time. And it's really incredible to think that what we now think of as the ideal body shape has changed many times since the ancient Greeks in terms of what we think it should look like. There was a period in the 1700s where the bigger you were, the more prosperous you were, which obviously is completely different to the way that we look at fitness and what our body should look like in today's society. So to give you a little insight into me and my fitness journey, I didn't like what my body looked like at school. There was a fair amount of body shaming in our school, especially when it came to swimming and things like that. So not only from the other boys within the changing room, but also I remember on one occasion, a whole group of girls had managed to get off swimming and sat at the top watching everybody and grading everybody based on their bodies. So I think I carried a lot of that kind of shame into my teenage years around what my body should look like and what other people thought it should look like. I was very much influenced by the models that you saw on magazines and things who all had these chiseled abs and huge pecs and huge shoulders and huge arms, which I now understand is really good lighting, the fact that they haven't eaten for 3 days, the fact that they've dehydrated themselves. A lot of them are probably on some kind of steroid or testosterone booster. And also they've probably done about 100 press-ups before they go into their photo shoot. So I understand now that that's not a realistic body image, and even the people who are photographed like that don't look like that normally. But at the time, I think that fed into a lot of my discomfort with the way that my own body looked. So I think that kind of drove me towards the gym at 16 because I wanted to change the way that my body looked. I wanted to look more like those people. And luckily, over time, I found a love for exercising and especially kind of being in the gym and lifting weights and things like that, which surpassed the initial desire to look a certain way. So having that structure and that idea in mind, it's for me, and I am aware that I'm really lucky in this regard. I found a joy in going to the gym and in exercising, which I have then carried through the rest of my life. And so exercising and going to the gym is always something that's been really consistent for me. Having said that though, I still struggle sometimes with body dysmorphia. I can still look in the mirror and think, oh, I wish I had slightly more exposed abs, or I wish my legs were slightly bigger, or my arms were slightly bigger, or my shoulders were slightly bigger, or any of these kind of things. But I am trying to shift that narrative away from what I look like and more towards what my body can do. And actually now I'm past 40, not just what my body can do, but what my body might be able to do for the next 30 or 40 years. So I'm really kind of trying for myself to transition to a more sustainable and functional kind of fitness. Over the years, I've also done a lot of other things. So I've done rugby and Muay Thai, triathlons and powerlifting. And what I've actually noticed through doing all of those things is that each of these different specific things that I put my mind to and I focus on completely changes the way that my body looks. And all of those different body shapes are functional. They are actually designed for the purpose that I'm using them for. So when I was doing the triathlon training, I had a very flat chest, I had very wide shoulders because of the swimming that I was doing, and then I had a very small waist. Whereas when I was doing the powerlifting, everything was about muscle mass. So the powerlifting, I got to a point where I couldn't really wear trousers because my thighs were too big. And actually, the more I lean into understanding the functional aspects of what my body is doing, the more incredible I find my body and the way that it can adapt to the environment that I put it in. I also have found a real love for the science of exercising. If you ever looked at my YouTube history, there is hundreds of science-based and exercise-based videos that I tend to watch. There's a whole heap of Audible books which I have listened to that are all to do with understanding your body better, and then also moving into the nutrition area and how that impacts everything, supplements and so on. So I would say that exercise for me is probably one of my special interests. I would happily have like a 3-hour discussion about a tiny part of exercise and the way that it makes your body work. But then I think it's not just about my body. I found that for my mental health especially, having that time out to do that exercise where that's the only thing that I'm focused on because of the intensity of the exercise that I'm doing, it puts me into a flow-like state, like a no-mind state. And that's incredible for my mental health in a way that just trying to think about your problems or meditate or something doesn't touch on. I think there's something really special about the way that when my mind and body are occupied on the same task, it really gives a level of focus and flow that you don't get when you separate the two things out, at least for me. It's definitely a way that I can find peace and acceptance, and then also you get all of the added benefits of all of the endorphins and things that you get after exercise, which obviously give you a little bit of a natural high, give you a bit more energy throughout the day. So I think that's my experience of exercise. And I am very aware that I'm lucky that exercise is just part of my life. But I think there is still a paradox with modern fitness and the modern fitness world, which creates this idea that you have to do certain things to look a certain way, and you almost have to ignore your body and your body's signals in order to get to the end result, rather than focusing on the process, focusing on the action, and whether or not you enjoy that particular action, which will in turn drive your desire to do it more. I know, for example, that if I play rugby, even non-competitive touch rugby on the park with people from the age of 20 all the way up to the age of 70, I will run harder and for longer than I ever would if I was just stood in a cold gym on my own. And that is because there is a functional element to it. I am almost distracted from some of the physical discomfort that you get from exercising, which you can push through. But if you find something that you love doing that happens to be physical, then it's almost like that discomfort is counterbalanced by how much you enjoy the activity. Modern exercise industry also definitely ignores things like longevity and function, in my opinion. I think the idea that you would continue to exercise through pain, and this is a really interesting thing that is something that you learn at a certain point during your exercise journey, that there is a big difference between discomfort and pain. Discomfort is where it really doesn't feel nice, but I'm going to keep doing it because it's good for me. Or because I want to achieve a certain goal. Pain is where this hurts when I do it. And I think with this idea of the detachment of the way that your body feels and moves, and that being detached from exercise, almost creates this position where it's very easy to push through pain and not understand the difference between the two. And then I think about what actually drives me. So now what is driving my desire to exercise is all around longevity and flexibility and being able to move in any direction and do any kind of movement with no pain and with the strength and power and agility to be able to do it easily. But that's not what's always driven me. And I think you do need a target when it comes to moving your body in that way. You do need something to aim for in order to feel more driven towards achieving those goals. I think having an outcome, even if it is an outcome at some point in the future and you don't end up getting to that outcome, focusing on the actions is important, but also kind of knowing where you're going is a great motivator to keep you going back, keep you exercising, keep you fit. Because I think the long-term benefits are really difficult for us to keep in the forefront of our minds while we're struggling through the discomfort of an exercise session or a long bike ride or even a 2-hour walk. Keeping the idea that in 20 years this is going to make me healthier and less likely to be in pain then is really difficult to focus on. So although that should really be our driving force, I think having something as a tangible short to middle term outcome is really important to keep that motivation up. I learned something recently about the fact that motivation is actually just the ability to focus on a thing for a prolonged period of time. So once you stop focusing on something, then your motivation for that thing goes down. Whereas if it's something that's in the forefront of your mind, then your motivation to keep doing it will be higher. And I think that goes for exercise. And the reason that I bring that up is because I think that having a short to middle term goal for your exercise journey, even if that goal changes over time, helps to keep it in the forefront of your mind and keep you motivated towards that. There's also this idea that I've been playing with recently about the fact that our modern society, as we've built it, actually helps to encourage that disconnect between our bodies. We are constantly ignoring all of our body's signals, whether they are the need to move, the need to hydrate, the need to get up and go to the loo. I know in my job, there are lots of times that I am on a conference call or doing some work that's really intense that I have to kind of sit down and focus on for a long period of time. And I completely disregard all of my body signals and then realize that it's been 2 hours and I haven't had a drink. And I think there's a lot of this, the way that we have created a work environment that leads to this extra disconnect with our bodies. It doesn't feel like it would be appropriate in the middle of a meeting to say, actually, my legs are really twitchy, I'm just going to go for a 5-minute walk. Although that's probably what I'm thinking most of the time. So I think exercise and the way that we create a functional program for ourselves definitely helps us tap back into our bodies. And the more I think about my functional fitness and my movement throughout the day, the more I get up and move around because I'm more tapped into what my body's actually telling me and the signals that it's giving me. I'm also quite lucky that I work from home, so I can, while on a conference call, stand up at a standing desk or lift a couple of weights, or actually in the corner of this office, I have a small pull-up bar that I'll occasionally do some pull-ups on just to keep my body moving throughout the day because it tells me to. And I am lucky enough that I'm in a position where I can listen to it at the moment. So then I started thinking about how I would rethink fitness for our modern lives. I question how much exercise we really need to do. And this is by separating out what we currently think of as exercise, which is going to the gym or doing weight training or something like that, from just being functionally active all day. We have lost the balance of longevity, strength, power, agility, and function. And so, if I was going to redesign exercise for the modern world, I would try and incorporate all of those things. Now, I'm aware that some places, some gyms, and things like that are starting to try and do that. There are functional fitness gyms that run classes and things that are more focused on moving your body in different ways. I think there is still a long way to go with that, and I think they are still most of the time kind of hamstrung by the fitness industry and what's expected in terms of aesthetics and movement patterns and things like that. I think even if we look at CrossFit, for example, CrossFit is meant to be all about functional fitness, and yet the kind of movements that they encourage people to do, especially beginners, are quite complex power lifting movements, and that leads to a lot of injuries within the CrossFit world, because although they are functional movements and it is functional fitness, there is still a disconnect between the way that you should be approaching those kind of movements and the amount that you would need those kind of movements within your day-to-day life. Getting up off the floor is much more important than being able to power clean 100 kilos. And especially, in fact, when it comes to CrossFit, there's an extra danger that because of the pack mentality of it, people will again push through the discomfort into pain, because you just have to finish. You just have to ignore all of your natural body signals telling you not to do something in order to push through to get to the end of a workout. And I think there's probably a better balance to be struck somewhere in there between the functional movement, which is really positive for the CrossFit movement in general, the way that they encourage everybody and the community spirit of all of that, and the kind of movements that they encourage, which are still quite powerlifting focus in a lot of their workouts. I think I would also definitely press more into the idea of functional fitness throughout the day. So that means everybody should be expected to walk a bit rather than using public transport. Everybody should be expected to be able to get up from their desks whenever they want and walk around and have meetings while walking around rather than having to be static to do these things. I think some of the legacy of having to be on a production line within an industrial world and the kind of modern tech that we have now means that it would be perfectly acceptable, perfectly reasonable and easy for everybody that was on a conference call that didn't need to look at a screen to be going for a walk at the same time. And yet I still think that that would be frowned upon within the modern work life, that if someone heard a car beeping in the background while you were on a conference call, they would question why you weren't at your desk. I think the other thing that I would do is probably also look at the variety of movement. Look at moving in different ways, like sagittal plane exercises, anything that moves across the body rather than straight up and down would really help balance our functional strength and ability for our bodies to react to unknown stimulus in the moment. Rugby and golf and things like that tend to use rotational forces that aren't really developed within a standard commercial gym. And thinking really carefully about what it is that we need our body to do, moving like our bodies should. That includes things like crawling and all of the functional animal movements that Ido Portal really encourages. The ability to move your body in any way without pain and with the strength to be able to hold positions and hold yourself rather than having lots of non-functional muscle, or potentially muscle which is functional for very specific tasks but not for general day-to-day living. I think I'd also, if I was going to start from a clean slate, start to redefine exercise, or the way that people think about exercise, as more functional movement for your body and not about this kind of block of time where you go and do a specific thing. I think doing movements which encourage pain-free living, you do need strength to be able to get up out of a chair without making a funny noise, or without your knees hurting, or walking up the stairs. You need to be able to, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, lift your child out of the car while twisting, while they're wriggling because they don't want to leave a toy behind, and not injure your back. And I think we forget about that sometimes when thinking about exercise as this thing that needs to be done in order to stay healthy. It's also about being able to then move in a way that facilitates your life without getting injured. And then we bring in the understanding of the way that society has shaped our movement, and especially with kids in school, children are being taught to sit still and quietly without fidgeting for 8 hours because that's what the work world expects of them. Whereas I would like to see a world where adults and children move freely depending on their energy profile and the needs of their body at any given moment. We should be able to walk around while we're thinking about things as much as another person might want to kneel down or sit or put their legs up in a way that is functional for them, without it being seen as an affront to the way that everybody should interact, which is sitting down at a desk or around a table. There's this lovely idea in a book that I'm really fond of by David Epstein called Range. And it's this idea that there's specialists who, and he's talking about a sports world, but there's specialists like Tiger Woods, who was hitting golf balls from the age of kind of 2. And that was his one thing, and he really specialized on that. So his whole body was created for this specific movement. And then there's other people who are generalists who get into their sports quite late, but because of developing lots of different core skills and core movement patterns, it actually makes them both really good at their particular sport, but also really creative and move in ways that aren't expected from the sport. So the example that he gives is Roger Federer, who, although his mum was a tennis coach, would rather play football and basketball and all of these other sports, and got into tennis quite late. Now, what I also make an assumption about when I was listening to that book was also, now with hindsight, the relative careers and the body health of those two individuals. If we look at Roger Federer, he carried on playing tennis into his late 30s, I think, and he was fit and healthy and still winning Grand Slams at that point. Whereas Tiger Woods has struggled for many years now with back issues, and he's never quite got back to that prime. And I do wonder whether some of that is because his body was built for this one thing, and there was something to do with the extra pressures on his body of only being able to perform a certain kind of movement, whereas Roger Federer built up the capability within his body at a functional level to be able to move in lots of different ways before he specialized. So I think for me personally, I am going to start applying some of this principle, and I'm going to try and move for a little while into the idea of yoga being my main functional movement. I think it has lots of positive qualities. And I've actually introduced this in the last week or so, where I've reduced the amount of weight training that I'm doing and made yoga my primary focus. And although I'm aiming to do it about once a day, I'm also trying to listen to my body, and when it's really tired or it needs a break, it normally tells me, and then I can adjust using that. The other thing that I'm using with yoga is I'm doing different kinds of yoga. So I really like yin yoga at the moment, which is actually, for me, more like a really deep meditative stretch. I think even if that's the only thing that I'm doing throughout the day, there's a massive benefit to that in terms of carving out time to move my body and my mind in one and find a peaceful place while also stretching and strengthening my muscles. The other really lovely thing that I like about yin yoga is that it's actually a really good analogy for lots of other things in life. So the idea or the principle is that you get into a really deep stretch, and then you focus first on your body. And once you're comfortable and settled within your body, you then move on from the sensations that you can feel in your body and you concentrate on your breath. And the more you relax into a posture, the more stretch you get, because the stretch and the pain response that you actually get from deep stretches is your body's way of trying to protect yourself from injury. But in doing so, by relaxing more, it actually allows you to stretch more and soften into the stretch with less uncomfortableness. The third stage of yin yoga is then dropping into a deep meditation. So you stop paying attention to your breath and you're just there in the space and you're at peace while still in this quite deep stretch that you may not be able to reach on your own. I think I love the analogy of when things are really difficult or challenging, that actually some of the time what we need to do is soften into them, accept them, accept the sensations and the difficulty that surrounds them, and soften into that stretch or that difficulty or that challenging situation. And it actually makes it easier to deal with than if you were tense and you were fighting against it. Having said that, I love lifting weights. It gives me lots of endorphins, and I'm not getting the same kind of endorphin release from yoga. So I haven't been completely without doing weight training. There's also a benefit of weight training in terms of muscle density as you grow older, especially for women actually who, as they get older, tend to suffer more with hollow bone syndrome and having more brittle bones. So weight training and resistance training specifically as you get older is really important to maintain muscle mass and maintain bone density. So I don't want to drop that out completely, but I am trying to do that alongside at least one yoga session per day. The other thing that I really want to keep somewhere in my exercise routine is a bit of boxing, because it's really good for kind of twisting action. And also there's some really good YouTube videos that push me to work harder than I would do on my own. So I think I'm going to try and balance those three things, but with yoga as my main focus for at least a month, and then see how that changes my body, see how my body feels, and whether or not I feel more flexible and more powerful and stronger from doing those things than I would from just lifting weights for an hour while questioning why I'm picking up the weight in the first place. So I think in conclusion, what I would take from this exploration is the idea that maybe we shouldn't think about exercise as exercise. Maybe we should think about it as functional movement for our bodies, where whatever movement we're doing, it has to feel right for our body. And we have to find a level of enjoyment in it in order to keep going back and keep doing that thing. If there is a sport or an exercise functionality that you particularly enjoy, then that's where you can put your focus. My wife loves dancing. So for her, it's much more enjoyable to go to a dance class for an hour than it is to stand in our garage lifting weights over her head. So I think that's really key. I also think that generally I would like for me and for everybody else to potentially think about the holistic approach to body and mind being intertwined, being intimately connected. I think for a long time, and the way that I was always taught it, is our mind is in control and our body does what it's told. And I think there's some recent research coming out now that actually says that our body tells our mind a lot of the time. So I'm doing a lot of work in therapy at the moment around trying to work out what my emotions are. And that always starts with, where do I feel it in my body? Where does my body take that energy and put it as a way of then understanding what emotion is involved with that? So I think moving to a place where we balance our body and our mind together and we see them as a whole organism rather than as a one driving the other, I think that would be really beneficial. And then finally, I would love it if we could just start from scratch and scratch all of the societal ideals around what we should or shouldn't look like, what we should or shouldn't be doing on any given day. I think listening to our bodies and being in tune with our bodies and the way that they work would have massive overarching benefits to not only the kind of movement that we do throughout the day, but also the food that we eat and how we interact with other people and how healthy we feel on the inside. So I think if we stop thinking about exercise as exercise, turn it into thinking about functional movement, and also then wipe off this idea of it being a chore or aiming at an aesthetic goal, but instead aim towards just reconnecting with our bodies and moving in a way that feels right, that feels powerful and strong and energetic. It might turn into something that we don't have to do, but something that we want to. I'd love to know what you think about this, whether or not you've had a similar experience with exercise, whether or not you've tried to put yourself into an exercise program and it's never really felt like it fit, or whether you've ever considered any of these things, and potentially if there's anything that I've missed, anything that you would add or anything that you disagree with in what I've said. As I've said in my other podcasts, I'm always really intrigued to hear other people's opinions and understand other viewpoints to add into my own to potentially challenge the way that I think. So by all means, write me a note or tell me what you think about this episode and whether or not it's challenged the way that you think about exercise moving forwards. Thanks for listening. Bye.